You gotta have knowledge for life. You gotta have knowledge for life.
And so with that, I'm happy and honored to present a brother who is going to go into the last portion of this, the keynote speaker, who will give us a good understanding of the power of propaganda. And I want us to give our brother a warm round of applause, Brother Bakari Lumumba. All right.
Thanks so much. How y'all doing today? Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay. Yeah, so I usually when I do a lecture, I like to do it in a workshop type of fashion. So there'll be a lot of call and response. You know, that's a traditional African thing. But also I want to hear what y'all have to say. So throughout my presentation, I'm going to ask you all a lot of questions to see how you if you're tracking, and see how you feel about what it is we're going to be discussing. So of course we're simply going to be discussing propaganda, what it is, why it is important to understand it, and how it is used against us. Would we say that we have black zombies in our community?
Right.
Well,
I would say that, yes.
How so?
I would say we're asleep to a lot of things that go on in our community. Like the newspaper.
Okay.
Brother Stephen was just talking about the newspaper and our resistance to even opening it up.
Mm-hmm.
Our resistance to just paying attention to what goes on amongst us is a verification that we're asleep. How drugs continues to filter through our community, and how our black men continue to go to prison at record numbers. We're asleep because we just allow it, and we're apathetic to it.
Okay.
So
where do you think that zombieism comes from?
I think it comes from slavery. I think it comes from fear. I think it comes from the media, intimidation, lack of love of self.
Okay.
Various things.
Anyone else want to chime in? Steve?
I want to add to what Sister was saying, and the lack of knowledge of self. Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Garvey said, a man without his history is like a tree without roots.
Correct.
And, a lack of knowledge of self is what the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said is an amnesia victim. A person who doesn't have the knowledge of his past is a person who suffers from amnesia. Mm-hmm. And so in our lack of knowledge for self, we don't know who we are, and we don't know what direction to go in. So anything that comes into our community, we gravitate not necessarily to it, but up under it. So if Islam comes, we try to be Arab. Mm-hmm. If Christianity comes, we try to be white. Mm-hmm. You know, if anything comes, we go up under it instead of claiming it to be our own.
Well, that's a very good point. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, so I think...
Okay, we get to you, brother, too.
Sorry. So I think I agree with both Steve and Sister Lynn, but I think that one of the underlying sort of biggest issues for me is the institutional system of white supremacy. And so in those institutions, right, we know that knowledge was kept from us. We know that for hundreds of years we were never allowed to read or anything like that. So I think that while we are allowed to read now, we have to remember that Malcolm said racism is like a new Cadillac. They reinvent a new model every year. Mm-hmm. So while, we don't have the so-called institution of chattel slavery anymore, slavery itself is still very much alive. Mm-hmm. They reinvent themselves every year. And we also have black complicity. So you have these so-called black leaders, black pastors, people who are following the system, for a few dollars at the expense of the masses of the community. So it takes individuals and programs like this to try to do the best that they can to get the information out to the community, even when they are resistant to it, because I think that has a lot to do with it. People are become resistant to it once they've been brainwashed by propaganda.
Yeah, I know Malcolm said, he said a lot of the so-called leaders were quick to curse out colonialism. They were quick to curse out imperialism. But boy, they didn't curse out dollarism. Man. He said before you knew it, you were Uncle Tom. Before you even knew it. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, I think it's more like a conditioned response. and that is that once if you keep telling a child something, then eventually they believe that. Sometimes, well, often in the media, you hear, not only do you hear, but you see, as far as imagery. So with that imagery, that's what a lot of times people emulate. So they'll see, it's like a particular fashion. And the golden shoes are the fashion for today, so everyone is emulating that. At one point, as soon as rap, hip-hop hit the scene, everyone tended to want to gravitate towards, I'm going to be a hip-hop artist. With that conditioned response, sometimes we overlook the other accomplishments, such as the science, the medicine, the businesses. So until we can actually take control of that and look and say, okay, even though the image is out there that say the good life is living as a superstar basketball player or actor or a artist, that we don't necessarily have to buy into that. We have to look at ourselves, and that is, how can we contribute not just to this society, but far as to humankind, far as a whole, and that's when we begin to discover ourselves and the importance that we bring.
Right.
And that's a good point. You know, I'm a sociology major as well as an African Studies major. One of the things we talk about in critical theory is the concept of preconditioned needs. And one of the things that, you know, some of the critical theorists argue is that people are programmed to believe that they have certain needs. You see, so when we see young men, young women, you know, aspire to be a basketball player or a singer, we see that they're being almost preconditioned. We know this is historically relevant when we look at slavery, to seek upward mobility through what? Entertainment. So we also see this across the racial spectrum in working class groups. Oftentimes people from a lower economic background will seek to upward mobility through entertainment. It may be sports, singing, you know, whatever, etc., etc. Yes, sir.
Pre-Civil War, actually, we were stronger as a people, pre-Civil War. Yeah, it was a bunch of slavery, but we had a lot of businesses as well. We had a lot of history that we brought over from Africa, where we had a lot of skill sets that we brought over from Africa. And these guys actually had their own areas all throughout the South. So when the North said, hey, and we look at him as freeing the slaves, and actually that wasn't Lincoln's piece. Lincoln didn't want to expand slavery. So when the North came in, they defeated the South. All of those businesses, the lands that our brothers and sisters own, all of those went towards the North.
All right, so we're gonna move right along. This is probably one of the only times I actually use a quote from a white man on one of my presentations. But Socrates, when he was on trial in Athens in 399 BCE, before the Common Era, he said that they took possession of your minds when you were children and filled them with lies. I'm paraphrasing, he actually said falsehoods, but we can argue that that's still happening today. You know, when we go to school, we hear, you know, George Washington never told a lie, never told a lie, never told a lie, and the truth goes marching on. You know, we hear that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but we know that that's not true. Okay, we know George Washington did tell a lie. He had 376 slaves working on his plantation the day he died. He sold one of our ancestors for a barrel of whiskey. You see? So this is some of the falsehoods that have been filled in our minds since we were children. As Brother Steve alluded to earlier, I want to give a definition of propaganda. And it's stated, of course it is a noun, and it's stated to be information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Second definition is the dissemination of such information as a political strategy. Of course, we all know Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the great Pan-Africanist, or many people argue to be the greatest black leader of the 20th century. I myself believe that he was, simply for the fact that, of course, he was able to organize black people all throughout the world, regardless of their nationality. He also had a newspaper known as the Negro World, and it had a distribution as far as Australia. See, this is in the 1910s, 1920s, no cell phones, no computers, no laptop, nothing but word of mouth, telegram, and a belief in himself. And he went and did it. He stated that, he said Napoleon under France did it. He said America under George Washington did it. He said Germany under Prince Denmark did it. And he said, we shall do it. That's what he said. He said, if we don't do it, we will die. He states that among some of the organized methods used to control the world is the thing known and called propaganda. Propaganda has done more to defeat the good intentions of races and nations than even open warfare. Propaganda is a method or medium used by organized peoples to convert others against their will. Key word is organized peoples. We, the Negro race, are suffering more than any other race in the world from propaganda. Propaganda to destroy our hopes, our ambitions, and our confidence in self. We all know Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. He states that the media is the most powerful entity on earth. They had the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent. And that's power because they control the minds of the masses. And one of the examples he alluded to, he says during World War II, the media was used to teach the American citizens to hate the Nazis. He said, but after World War II, before you know it, everyone was friends with Germans again. He said, this is the power that the media has. Of course, we are very aware of Nazi propaganda and how they use this in the Jewish Holocaust. He had appointed Joseph Goebbels as his Minister of Propaganda and National Enlightenment. And the basic goal was to ensure that nobody in Germany could read or see anything that was hostile or damaging to the Nazi Party. Now, as a result of that Nazi propaganda program, they really got the German people to believe that they were superior to everyone else. You know, it's a form of nationalism. Some people call it fascism. But one of the big things was that when they were on the Eastern Front in World War II, when they were fighting against the Russians, you know, it gets very cold in Russia, so on and so forth. Matter of fact, I think when they chose to invade Russia, they had one of the coldest winters on record. And they believed that the German manufactured winter uniforms would keep you warmer than the Russian manufactured winter uniforms. And it turned out that that wasn't so. Literally, they was fighting, they was in Stalingrad, and they was freezing to death. The Russians had surrounded the city, and man, they started taking off those Russian soldiers' uniforms, put them on. But they never let that get back to Berlin. Because, of course, you know, you could believe, you know, the effect it had on their morale. To state, hey, you know what, you know, our materials aren't as good as their materials. And the biggest issue was is that when they fell at Stalingrad, you know, the Red Army marched them back to Moscow and marched them through Red Square. And the Russian citizens said, look, these people aren't Superman. Not only can they be defeated, they quit. You see? But even the Russians have believed in the propaganda and said, man, their soldiers are Superman. They're better than us. They were even surprised that they were able to defeat them. You see? So that's the role propaganda can have. Another role of propaganda that we see is what's known as a hidden curriculum. You see, when you study education, what we find is that the hidden curriculum has a racial, economic, and gender connotation to it. You see, one of the things we know in hidden curriculum are gender roles. We understand that, you know, you have a daughter, you know, they wrap them in a pink blanket, you have a son, they wrap them in a blue blanket, they kind of socialize with what's the toys they're supposed to play with, but the child doesn't really know what's going on, you see. Another issue that we see is with the hidden curriculum is the fact that there is a lack of information about the accomplishments of colored people or non-white people in the world. When you go through school, when you take a class on humanities. Now, I remember I took a class in humanities at Sinclair. There was 14 chapters in the book. Chapter 1 through 9 was in Africa and Asia. The course started off on chapter 10. So what type of, you see, that's a hidden curriculum.
Right.
So unless you have the initiative to go and read for yourself, you know, those first 9 chapters, you're going to believe that humanity starts where? You see,
Europeans.
In Europe, with the Europeans. So then, of course, we have Paulo Freire pedagogy of the oppressed, in which he argues that based on your socioeconomic class, the type of education you receive is very different. For example, we're moving forward, we know about Carter G. Woodson, but researchers found that different social class backgrounds are rewarded for classroom behaviors that correspond to personality traits related to proposed occupational strata. This is very serious. Working class children are taught docility and obedience because they're trying to get them used to working for a power structure. You know, literally, this is real talk. Middle class children are taught initiative and personal assertiveness, i.e. they're going to be taught to be managers, you see, have a little control over people. Working class schools, children are educated into developing a potential conflict relationship with capital. We're talking about wealth now. The school work is routine and prepares them for future wage labor that is mechanical and routine. You see, but GM is gone. Those jobs are gone, right?
Right.
Children are taught mechanically involving rote behavior and very little decision making. Work is often evaluated according to whether it is right or wrong, but not according to whether it's right or wrong, but according to whether children follow the right steps. You see, one of the brothers alluded to this in Hidden Colors. You know, you put 4 plus 4 is 9. Well, good job, Jimmy. Jimmy, at least you tried. But Jimmy isn't going to be able to start a business if he can't add, if he can't subtract. You see. Middle class schools. Children develop somewhat different potential relationships to capital, authority, and work. Schoolwork is bureaucratic, thus preparing them for white-collar, working-class, and middle-class jobs in support of institutions in U.S. society. This goes along with what a Sasha Core title in her autobiography, which said that schools simply, the job of the schools was simply to get people to fill the cogs in a capitalist society. So your job is to graduate or get a degree to go work for someone else. This is what she argues. Work in these middle-class schools is getting the right answer, of course. In social studies, children are to read and answer questions correctly. Most lessons are from the textbook. However, from a critical perspective, most critical issues are avoided due to being perceived as dangerous. But moving on, when we go up the social class ladder, we're going to see that's not the case with the higher or elite schools. And this is one of the things I tell people when I do my lectures, especially with youth, is that other groups of people know what our problems are. You know, they know what the problem is, they know how to solve it, but we don't know. You know, and I'm like, man, why don't y'all do something about that? I gave a lecture in Troy at the Lincoln Community Center. And it was a mixed race group, about 50% white, 50% black. They didn't sit away from each other. They were, of course, mixed together. And I talked about, you know, a little bit about Dr. Jawan's Kunjufu when he wrote his book called State of Emergency, We Must Save Black Males. And in the book, he alludes to a list of statistics. And he says that this was going on in any other community, there would be a state of emergency.
That's right.
You know, as you alluded to, we're apathetic. And, you know, some of the black folk were sitting there looking at me like, man, you know, why y'all bring him here? And sadly, some white man came up to me and said, man, I love what you had to say. You're absolutely right. And they said to me, he said, that was going on in our community. It would be a problem. We'd be raising him. Matter of fact, we'd be burning it down. Yes, ma'am.
You just alluded to my question. You must have seen the caption.
Okay, I did.
My question is, we realize that there's inequity in the school systems,
Yes,
because now your test scores determine how much money your school system gets.
Right.
And our children are well behind the curve when it comes to test scores. So of course our schools are in a constant state of inadequacy because they don't have the test scores, they don't get the money, they don't get the teachers, they don't get the resources. But my question is, where do the parents fit into this equation? Okay,
that's a good question. We can answer that right now. Are you familiar with critical race theory?
I am.
Okay, wonderful. You know, one of the things they advocate is a revisionist history. That means going back and looking at the history from the perspective of how it's affected us now. course, they allude to the fact that Brown Board of Education did not help us at all. We also know, Sister Maria here, Sister Zakia, I'm sorry, that when we look at the school-to-prison pipeline, this may be a bit radical of a thesis, but the school boards, for the most part, we can say are in on it. We can argue that. So from a critical race theorist perspective, from a nationalist perspective, I don't think that the solution would be to go down and picket and, protest. No, the 50 Negro movement is out. You get 50 Negroes in Courthouse Square. No one cares. White people turn around, look at the cubicle and say, there's power in numbers. They don't have nobody. We go back to work. That's what's going to happen. After a week, no one does anything. My argument is that what we have to do is we have to go to some of these elite schools. Go in there and say, hey, don't go in there talking about red, black, and green. Go in there, and say, hey, my name is, Reverend Chicken Wing. And, I want to put my children in an elite school. Find out what they're teaching those children. Find out what type of resources those children are getting. What type of methodology, what type of learning strategy those children are getting that we're not getting in our school. Then bring it back to our community and then teach the children. That would be my argument. Yes, ma'am.
So my response to that, and I don't mean directly, because I hear a lot of that in my work is what about the parents? I think that parents are doing the best that they can, and I think that I can speak from a personal perspective because there is what you call a preschool to prison pipeline, and for me, I had to start advocating for my son when he was just 3 years old in a private preschool. But understand that you have to sacrifice very much when you spending full time as a poor parent who don't have the resources of a middle class or an upper class person. Most of the parents in this community are poor, working class people. Either they own assistants or they working 2 or 3 jobs. It's not that parents don't care about their children. I really hate that we perpetuate that myth, and I'm not saying that you say that, but in my work, that's what I hear all the time. It's the parents' fault. It's the parents' fault. And from my perspective, I hold institutions accountable. And so one of the reasons why we are calling on the Dayton School Board to make changes is because that's where the majority of our children are. I advocate homeschool. I advocate actually an education for liberation based on Dr. Amos Wilson's work. But at what point do we in our community have the resources to start a homeschooling collaborative? Do we even have the will to do that? So in the meantime, you do go down to an elected school board and you tell them, these are the numbers. I brought numbers with me from Montgomery County and from Dayton Public Schools. Why are you suspending our children preschool through 3rd grade out of school and black males, especially with quote unquote emotional disorders, at higher number rates? This is a human rights issue for me, because if these children are causing problems, yeah, okay, they might not have adequate parents, but you getting paid. You got all these top-heavy administrators down here. What are they doing? Somebody needs to be responsible in this community for educating our children, because we're literally saying, because these kids come to school and they may be disruptive and causing problems, that it's okay to throw them away. And so in my opinion, it's not okay to throw not one of our babies away. Not just my son, but none of the kids. Because my thing is, it takes a community. Where is our village? If they don't have parents, where's the rest of the community to step in and try to help that child? And so that's why we're calling on the institution, which is Dayton Public Schools, because they get tax money from this community, okay, as a collective, to change things for all of the children. One of the things that's disturbing, because we've been digging back the layers with Dayton Public Schools, is that they have restorative justice programs in East Dayton schools. Okay, Dayton is very segregated. When they stopped doing the Brown versus Board of Education busing, we got all of our black kids in the West Dayton schools and most of the white and immigrant kids in East Dayton schools. So you can't tell me that they don't believe in restorative justice, which is what we're advocating for, or positive behavior interventions, because they believe in it for the little white kids. They just don't believe in it for ours. And you got black leaders down there. That's a problem.
That's part of that hidden curriculum. So we talked about the working class schools, the middle class schools, and the reason why this is important, because we know that the basis of racism is economics. If you make more money, that's a better quality of life. You have better quality of life. You have more access to resources, i.e., better education, healthcare, i.e., what? You may live longer. That means you could work more, develop more, gain more wealth, pass it on to your children's children, so on and so forth. As a result of the hidden curriculum, oftentimes we hear that, whatever socioeconomic class you're born in, you would die in. And this shows that it's basically not the person's fault, it's due to the type of education that they receive, that people do not experience economic upward mobility. outside, you know, cutting somebody's throat or stepping on people to get ahead. So moving on to affluent professional schools. Affluent professional schools, children develop a relationship to capital that is instrumental and expressive and involves substantial negotiation, preparing them to be businessmen. So in these schools, you know, when children are disrupted, they actually negotiate with them. You know, so what if you do that, Tommy, Billy, what do you think would happen? So they're able to think about consequences, you know, so they negotiate with them, they're training them to be businessmen. Work is creative activity and carried out independently. School districts require, in the affluent professional schools, 5th graders to study ancient civilizations, in particular Egypt, Athens, and Sumer. Most of the time when we study ancient civilization, it's because we got a private study group in the basement of our house, right? We don't even get that in college sometimes. Right. These are 5th graders in affluent schools learning these type of things. Children regularly give oral presentations, thus preparing them for public speaking, i.e. leadership. These are affluent professional schools, which are public. We're not even talking about private right now. This is the hidden curriculum. And of course, executive elite schools, most of these schools are private. A good example here would be the Miami Valley School. It's about, what, 24,000 a year to go there. Executive elite schools give children something none of the other schools does. Knowledge and the practice of manipulating the socially legitimated tools of society. So they're teaching them to be politicians. They teach them how to get over on the system. You see, they're teaching them how to take, you know, what the law may say, but construe it in their interest. You see, this is why we see most politicians are lawyers. You know, the politicians are the ones that draft the legislation that become laws. You see, this is what we're talking about here. This is the type of education that these children are getting at a very young age. If you don't believe me, read C. Wright Mills' The Power Elite. We all need to read that book, The Power Elite. Work is developing one's analytical intellectual powers. Children are continually asked to reason through problem solving. Reason. Right. Reason. This is why playing chess is very important. In social studies, children most often discuss real concepts of independent research. They are asked analytical questions. These are 5th graders now, 11-year-olds. What mistakes did the citizens of Athens make? How did Greece build an economic empire? I've been in college and still ain't learned that. You see what I'm saying here? They cover concrete social issues. Why do workers strike? Why do we have inflation? What can be done to stop it? Why do companies put chemicals in food when natural ingredients are available? They're learning this in 5th and 6th grade. Not college, not graduate school, 5th, 6th grade. This is what we're talking about when we talk about that hidden curriculum. Then we wonder why. Generation after generation after generation, we have poverty. Generation after generation after generation, we have low-level manual labor as the main product of economic self-sufficiency in the black community. Then we wonder why when people say they want to start their own business, we look at them funny, because we're not being educated to even think that way. Or when we do it, he's trying to be white. You see what I'm talking about? It's that hidden curriculum. Okay. So we're going to get into hidden curriculum, of course, propaganda once again. So we can ask ourselves, when did propaganda start? We know it started with the transatlantic slave trade. Most people are unaware the transatlantic slave trade actually did not start in Africa. Does anyone know where the transatlantic slave trade actually began? It's Genesis. Eastern Europe. Slavic speakers is where the term slave came from Slav. The Europeans needed slaves to work their sugar plantations in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. But when the Muslims took over Constantinople, which is now known as Istanbul, it wasn't safe for them to go into Eastern Europe anymore. They said, we got to look somewhere else for free labor. So of course they came to Africa. Propaganda was created to justify the treatment of Africans as uncivilized savages and cannibals, in which slavery was needed to civilize and Christianize them. Africa was also seen as the dark continent. This is a term that's still being used in many white churches today. We had to go over to the dark continent and save them. I was taking a French class last semester, and this white girl said, yes, we have to go over there to Benin to help them because, you know, they've only been their own country for about 40 years and they don't know how. Took some self-control, some self. I said, well, you'll get up my face with that? You know, but I told her off, though. I told her off, but, you know, educatedly, though. Africa was seen as a dark continent, devoid of history, art, science, culture, religion, etc. This was also used as justification to rape African women due to the belief that they were sexually lascivious. So basically they said, well, we're raping them because they're fast anyway, so it's no big deal. And we see this even going on when we get into propaganda in contemporary media, African American media. It was also used to create the myth that we were physically able to handle the labor acquired on sugar plantations. This is one of the things I hear a lot of brothers talk about. Well, you know, they got us because, you know, we were fit, but that's not true. The average life of a slave was only 8 years on a sugar plantation in the Caribbean. 8 years. Where am I getting my information? The Anthology of Slavery by Claude Melisu, A Womb of Iron and Gold. In this book, he gives a detailed account of slavery, how it started, so on and so forth, and that the average life of a slave on a sugar plantation was only 8 years. So it wasn't that we were physically able to do the work. This negative propaganda has helped create the way we feel about ourselves today. We also know that out of the transatlantic slave trade came to what we know as social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, as well as scientific racism. And we see that propaganda is used by those who are powerful to the benefit to control those who are weak. A good example is if we look at basketball today, who is seen as the premier elite basketball players today? African Americans, right? Well, back in the 1910s, what ethnic group was it?
What?
Jews. And do you know the reason? Do you know what they said? Why they said Jews were the great at basketball? They said it was due to the artful dodger characteristic of their culture, that they were good at being thieves. This is what they said. Now check this out. In the early 1900s, they also stated about African Americans that we were feeble and most likely to die off. Today they say we're animalistic, prone to violence. There may be some gene that makes us inherently aggressive. So you see how it changes over time to benefit those who are in power. So now we're going to get into the importance of African American psychology. I brought this up because oftentimes we see that psychology is used in all types of mediums, education, entertainment, etc., etc. But oftentimes we are unaware of the importance of African or African American psychology, colloquially known as black psychology. Defined by Dr. K.K. Kaboom, African American psychology is a system of knowledge, philosophy, definitions, concepts, models, procedures, and practice concerning the nature of social universe from the perspective of African cosmology. Black psychology is nothing more or less than the uncovering, articulation, operationalization, and application of the principles of the African reality structure relative to physiological phenomena. That's a whole lot of words there. But basically we have two fundamental perspectives, and I like to call it the integrationist perspective or the universalist perspective, and of course the African or nationalist perspective. The first perspective is that psychological concepts and theories are universal. Thus, African Americans can be studied using universal laws and principles. I don't believe that that's the case at all. You take it, knock it out the park like King Griffey, right? What I believe, of course, is the second perspective, taken from Afrocentric scholars, is that African American psychology is the psychology of people of African descent. And these beliefs and behaviors are central to the study of African Americans, i.e., you can't put us into the same boat as everyone else. We are different.
Right.
A lot of us don't want to be different. Right. This is why we always saying, you know, we need to all come together. But, you know, the thing is, they know we're different. That's why they treat us different than everyone else. You know, we need to understand that. We need to understand that. I had asked a brother once. He was an engineering major, you know, very smart, great at math. And I asked him, so what do you think are some of the solutions? You know, because there's a difference from natural science or social science or engineering, how to build a building and how to solve social problems. So I asked him, I said, what do you think we should do to solve some of the problems that are affecting our community? He said, well, we need to love everyone. I said, okay. I said, all right, I appreciate that. You know, I did a 360 spin. You know, I said, okay, I appreciate that. I said, now. I said, okay, but it's cool. I said, now tell me how loving everyone is going to solve the problem of poverty.
Right.
You know, that's okay. I hit you with a hard question. You know, that was double jeopardy. Let's go regular jeopardy. For 200, tell me how to solve the problem of prison school pipeline. For 200, Alex. Couldn't get an answer. You see? Couldn't get an answer. You see? Because it's very easy to say that.
Right.
But actually, you want to solve a problem, you got to study. You got to do some work. It's easy to say I want to love everyone. That's a very ambiguous term. You can just give somebody a hug and say we loving everyone. You see. So now we want to get into mental disorders. You know, when we look at regular psychology, you know, I actually have a DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. You know, they have a lot of mental disorders in there. But when you study African American psychology or black psychology, we see that there's mental disorders that we have that other groups don't have, that you won't find in the DSM. And we all know that the DSM was founded by Benjamin Rush. I don't know if you knew that or not. And this man, matter of fact, his picture's on the back of the DSM to this day. And he was known as creating a mental disorder known as drapetomania. And when he stated that if the slave ran away, it was because he was out of his mind. And that the only way to get him back into his sane mind was to whip the living you-know-what out of him. He also created a mental disorder known as negrotude. And when he stated that black skin made us dumb. And that, you know, it was contagious, so you don't want to rub up against them. And that the way to treat negrotude was to what? Teach the slave to be as white as possible. So if we got to heaven, I'm not making this up. Okay, mental disorders, alien self-disorder. This is mental disorders that are authored by Dr. Naeem Akbar. He wrote Breaking the Psychological Chain of Slavery. And what he states is that alien self-disorder are disorders found among people who behave in ways that are counter to their natural disposition. An example of this is materialism. African Americans have been socialized. That means it's not our nature, but we've been taught, you know, from a young age to be socialized to materialistic goals and evaluate their work by the prevalence of material accomplishments. This is why we see, oftentimes, we see this across the racial strata with lower class communities. The more money a person makes, the more money a person spends. I remember Dr. John Conjufu in his book, Black College Student Survival Guide, says, how can you live off $10 a week when you're in college? Graduate, get a job making $50 a year and still live in hand to mouth. The more money you make, the more money you spend. Anti-self disorder. This disorder is found among persons who identify with the oppressor and who are hostile to and reject members of their own group. We all know people like that. I used to be one of those folks. Okay? This is a real mental disorder that isn't being treated. And you can't solve it with just love. There needs some education behind it. You know, seriously, I went to Wright State, they had the African Student Union. And they put on a program called Africans and African Americans. You know, a conversation in translation, that's what it was called. And so they're getting up there and they're talking about all of the problems. Well, I don't like when people do this, and I don't like when African Americans do this, and I don't like when Africans do that. But no one could even propose a solution. You see how problematic it is? Right. But if you're not doing any research, you're not studying the problem, only thing you can do is talk about the symptoms. And of course, cultural misorientation. This is a condition that drives African people to engage in anti-black, racially disempowering, and self-destructive behaviors. Cultural misorientation can be found in education, religious practices, and the media. And I think this is the most important of all, cultural misorientation. Because it's almost a confluence of both of these. We take them on, and as a result, we become culturally misoriented. You know, we see this in what? You know, we want to lighten our skin. Right. Saw with Sammy Sosa. He had the money to go all the way, didn't he? You know, Michael Jackson had the money to go all the way. But then we also see this when we see black people, they may get a little money. They may create a sitcom, but then the sitcom is totally very stereotypical. Tyler Perry is a good example of that. Because you've internalized alien self-disorder, you've internalized anti-self disorder, and now you're culturally misoriented.
Wayne Brothers. You
know, very good example. Very good example. Okay. The Power of Television. This is coming from this book here, The Psychology of Blacks, an African-centered perspective. What the Association of Black Psychologists argue, sadly, is that television is the primary socializer of African American youth. Right. The primary socializer. Not the home, not the school, not the parents, not the church, mosque, synagogue, television. I know that was the case for me growing up. And then some of you know how I turned out, right? In my early 20s. African American youth watch on average 6 hours of television a day. That means the majority of African American youth get out of school, if they're going to school, come home and then watch TV till it's time to go to sleep.
Right.
When I was in high school, that was what I did. Got home, and I watched BET and Sports Center till it was time to go to bed. Television occupies a prestigious position in American society. And for some people, it tends to validate and add glamour to the roles being played. This is why some of our sisters nowadays, or some of our brothers, you know, they're watching Basketball Wives or Love and Hip Hop. And then they're emulating that behavior in their relationships and wondering why they're not being successful. Why they have dysfunctional relationships, because it's very glamorous. African American youth are being exposed to images and role models that depict the black community in very negative ways. This is why we have to understand the power of television. And they go into, of course, images of street smart children, adults that would do whatever it takes to get over. We see this a lot on reality shows. Anytime you watch a reality show, there are 3 core features of a reality show. You're going to have dysfunctionalism, you're going to have violence, and you're going to have hypersexuality. These are all stereotypes of black people that will be dysfunctional. Right? We can't get together and do anything in an efficient manner. Hypersexual. We've always been known to be sexually lascivious, promiscuous. These are stereotypes. And of course, violent. The stereotype is that we always had to kill him because I thought he was going to try to kill me.
Justifiable homicide.
Justifiable homicide. And we're seeing this in the reality show. So one sister, she's an education major. She's a co-worker, and she watches the reality shows. And I said, well, why are you watching that? She said, well, it doesn't affect me because I know it's not real. I said, but watching the show keeps its ratings up. Thus keeping it on for other groups of people can watch this and think this is how you behave. Then when you graduate, you go for an interview, and they're like, I don't know about her because I just watched Love and Hip Hop yesterday on basketball. So come on now.
Right.
You're participating in your own self-destruction. Shows that promote money, status, and material possessions, and sexual exploits as a measure of manhood and womanhood. We just alluded to this in what? The reality TV shows. And our children are watching. Some people think that it's not, that we're not, but they are. We all know the TV show Good Times, right? This was the theme song. This was the song that came on every time the show started. Keeping your head above water, making a way when you can. Temporary layoffs, good times, easy credit ripoffs, good times, scratching and surviving, good times, hanging in the child line, good times, ain't we lucky we got them. Good times. Do that sound like a good time to you?
No, sir.
How many of us watched it growing up?
Right. Right here.
What in the world is going on? It's just a TV show. It's no big deal. If it's no big deal, why are these the lyrics?
Right.
If it's no big deal.
Good point.
Minstrel shows. We all know about minstrel shows, correct? I hope everyone in here knows about minstrel shows. If not, we're going to get a brief education. The minstrel show was an American entertainment consisting of comic skits, variety acts, dancing, and music performed by white people in blackface. Especially after the Civil War. Minstrel shows lampooned black people as dim-witted, lazy, buffoonish, superstitious, happy-go-lucky, and musical. We see that all the time today. The minstrel began with brief burlesques, and comic entr'actes in the early 1830s, and emerged as a full-fledged form in the next decade. In 1848, blackface minstrel shows were the national art of the time. This is the national pastime almost, like baseball.
Right.
Translating formal art such as opera into popular terms for a general audience. And these was, of course, some of the flyers for the shows. You see here Coon, see here Vic Minstrel, Jubilee. Some of the minstrel show characters. And I'm going to show you how these minstrel show characters are prevalent in today's sitcoms. One of the minstrel show characters was the Zip Coon. Everyone referred to me like we're in French class, Zip Coon. Zip Coon. The Zip Coon was an urban African American, not more than one generation removed from the South. Usually overdressed, spent money lavishly, and was known to pontificate and use words out of context. You know, this is our boy here, Bishop Don Juan, right? He exemplifies the Zip Coon.
Now, who's the sister in the?
This is Maya. She's a singer. But what we see is one, oftentimes in entertainment, the
Well,
woman.
yeah, Phyllis Wheatley up there.
What reason? And this is why I'm putting them up there. Hold on
I
now.
didn't see who that was. Thank you.
Phyllis Wheatley, in her narrative, talks about the fact that the stereotype of the day was that they were pursuing married men, when the reality was that the men were raping them.
Okay.
And that's where this type of stereotype came from.
Okay.
That black women are pursuing married men due to the fact that the slave master would rape them. Anyone seen 12 Years a Slave? It's a good example. Yes. 12 Years a Slave, the slave master was raping her. So much that she asked the man, can you help me commit suicide? But the wife was like, nah, you just screwing my husband. So this is where this type of concept comes from, you see. And what we see is that even in the movie, in the TV show Scandal, you know, the sister, you know, she's a public relations specialist. She specializes in crisis management. But even though she has on some, you know, Gucci shoes or, you know, some stilettos and a nice dress, at the end of the day, you see her relationship to the power structure still laying on her back with a white man. And so what we know is that oftentimes people live vicariously through the entertainment that they watch or listen to. So if you're a young man and you are really into trying to be a drug dealer, you're going to listen to rappers that talk about selling drugs. Because you're living vicariously through the entertainment. When I tell sisters, when you watch that TV show, when you talking about I can't wait for Scandal, or I'm having a Scandal problem because I missed my last episode, maybe it's because what you really want to do is be some white man's mistress. Huh? Because you don't watch stuff that you're not into.
Right.
I don't watch reality shows because I'm not into that mess. So when you tell them you're watching the show, that's where you really want to be. Okay? When I was into playing basketball, I would watch Kobe Bryant and Tracy McGrady all the time. When I was younger, could still jump. Because that's what I was into. Okay? Can't run no game on me. Then of course, as we know, oftentimes when we look at African American entertainment, or African Americans in the press or in the media, oftentimes the women you have to be light skinned. Perpetuate the stereotype that the lighter you are, the more attractive you are. Sadly. But this is where it comes from. So yes, I'm not saying Phyllis Wheatley would like these women. I'm just stating that this is, in her narrative, she argues that this is where this type of concept came from. Of black women always pursuing the married man due to them being raped by the slave master. So we see how history is relevant even today. Right. A lot of people, when you're about doing something, community say, well, he's just her historian. You know, they say he's just her story, and that's kind of a way just to pigeonhole you as you're talking about stuff that doesn't matter anymore. But we know that's not the case. All right. Then, of course, we have the John. John is usually the well-behaved unless treated wrongly. And this is what I call them the black Republicans. Okay, Herman Cain, we know this brother from Florida, I don't think he was reelected. And then, of course, the buck nigger. This is usually depicted as a wealthy African-American male who loves white women. We see this all the time in sports and entertainment, but it gets some money, he goes white girl crazy.
Yeah.
This is not, in the Minstrel shows, this is what was known as the buck nigger. See? Say again?
She said, where's OJ?
Okay, well, you see that where that got him, right?
Right.
Okay, then of course we know about the Sambo. Depicted as a loud, ignorant brute who must be protected from everyone, to simple-minded, docile, and dependent on the slave master. We all know about the story of Little Black Sambo with bad hair. Story about some black boy who was so stupid that he gets tricked into being eaten by a tiger. Here's the thing, tigers live in Asia. Ain't no tigers in Africa. See what we're talking about here?
Right.
The stereotype is that we're so dumb that an animal can outsmart us. I was talking to a sister in class yesterday. She told me she liked the book. She liked the story growing up. I said, oh my goodness. So we need to have a talk offline. Seriously.
But she would growing up.
Growing up, you see.
She would.
But she still didn't have a problem until this day.
Oh, okay.
So she was 40-something and still was like, well, I mean, I don't see what the problem is. You see. Then of course we see our boy LeBron here. First athlete to appear on the cover of Vogue, high fashion magazine. Not only is it eerily similar, the woman has on the same style of dress. Same kind of dress. Same kind of dress. And I know we've all seen that one before. Then of course this one, the pickaninny. This is what they refer to the children as the pickaninny. Dirty, ignorant, troublesome, always appear to be unkempt, often speaking in a primitive, stereotypical dialect. Unkept images shows that the parents are neglectful. Another stereotype about black people that you alluded to is the stereotype that we're not good parents, that we don't care about our children, so on and so forth. Studies have shown that parents who are of a lower social class have the same expectations, same wants, needs, and aspirations for the children as parents from a higher social class.
Right.
Nothing is different. It's simply access to resources. That's what we need to know. And they are often compared to animals. We see our boy Martin here plays a pickaninny when he's Roscoe on the TV show. Yes! Mama was like, hell, I'm Roscoe. My mom told me I can't go to the mall. I said, hell, I'm Roscoe. I went anyway. Right? But I thought it was just television. I thought this was just history and it didn't matter anymore. Right? No, it's still going on today. Okay, let's see if I can get this video to play. I don't think it's going to play. But it was just a video of Roscoe. He has the police officers take him to Gina's house. Okay? And they're like, ma'am, we have your son. She's like, I don't have a son. He comes and crying, Mama, why would you say something like that? You know, and she's like, boy, what are you talking about? And she's like, boy, you ain't mind the police officer put their hand on the gun. And he's like, it's okay, officer, you know, she be drinking and stuff, but she's gonna be cool. She ain't gonna do nothing because she know y'all know her. It's just TV. Right. Supposed to get a laugh, right? No. Okay, and then this one, this mental show character, known as the Nat, named after, of course, Nat Turner, the great freedom fighter in Southampton County, Virginia, that led a slave rebellion in 1831. They say that the Nat is rebellious, militant, uncompromising, and seemingly always unhappy. So this is the picture there of Steve Biko. He founded the Black Consciousness movement in South Africa. And of course, the Black Consciousness movement was based on the teachings of course, the great Malcolm X. But this is what they say. This is what they say about us. Well, you just always, it's always something wrong. Well, but I don't want to be unhappy, but there is something wrong. You see? Just literally, what Malcolm said, he said, if you are not upset, you're in need of a psyche valve. If you ain't got a problem with what's going on, you need a psychological evaluation. And of course, I don't believe I'll be able to get this video to play as well, but this was a video done, it's another Martin TV show episode in which but Pam was dating this brother who was a militant. He was wearing all black, and but he was militant about frivolous things. They were going to a ski resort. Tommy says, yeah, I can't wait to get out there and hit the slopes. He said, man, yeah, that's something, considering that snow was white. They're like, all right, yeah, you know. Well, I mean, as an average African American, you're going to be like, well, I don't want to be a militant if people expect me to act like that. Right? Turns out at the end, he falls in love with a white woman. So not only does it say that they're militant about nothing, but at the end of the day, they're freaking hypocrites. You see what we're talking about here? It's just a TV show, though, right? Just a TV show. How is propaganda used today? We all know Ronald Wilson Reagan, and he was known as the Teflon president because no matter what they caught him doing, it didn't stick. Crack cocaine explosion was hyped in the media in 1982, 3 years before it ever hit the streets due to a extensive marketing campaign by the Reagan administration. See, end result, black men are viewed as dangerous, drug-dealing, gun-toting criminals who are a hindrance to the forward progress of humanity. And now this is a Photoshop. I went on Google and typed in African Americans, and this is the picture that came up. Literally, went on Google, typed in African Americans, and this is the picture that showed up.
Come on.
This is propaganda.
Yeah, it is.
Then we wonder why the unemployment rate in our community is what? 30–40%. They say a recession is 28%.
Right.
Then what we in?
Triple depression.
Literally. End result, black children are taught to hate themselves. We all know the study that was done in 2005 in Harlem, in which the sister decided to redo the Dawn experiment by Kimmy and Mammy Clark, Doctors Kimmy and Mammy Clark, and saw that the children in 2005 still felt the same way they did in 1952. And we know that the Dawn experiment was a landmark case that helped win Brown versus Board of Education. However, we also know, when we studied critical race theory, that there were cables being sent by American diplomats in Africa to D.C. saying, listen, we get a lot of bad press over here about what we're doing to African Americans back home. We're going to have to draft some legislation showing that things are changing if we want to get an inroad here to get these natural resources in Africa. So we also know that the bigger issue is what we act like we treat them nice, because we need to get these natural resources. And if you ever read Malcolm's autobiography, the last 3 chapters, when he talks about when he was abroad, he said when he went to Ghana, the white man were over there smiling in their face. He said they saw him and it was like, oh, dang, he gonna tell them what's up. You see. So we even see here in 2005, and I'm sure even here in 2014, that a lot of African Americans, as a result of this propaganda, through the media, through entertainment, through the education, through a hidden curriculum, through cultural misorientation, anti-self disorder, alien self disorder, feel the way that they do about themselves. One of the young girls that I work with, I'm an academic support specialist at Wright State University, and I'm supposed to help the students get off academic probation. But also I give them a book to read. And I gave the sister Asante Shakur's autobiography. That you're gonna read this book, and you're gonna tell me what you're getting from it. And as my last session, she stated to me, she said, I didn't realize that I didn't like who I was. I said, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean? You know, I knew what she was talking about. I said, what do you mean? She said, and I would always wear my hair straight. And I didn't like associating with anything that was black. Now she got her hair in cornrows. And she thanked me for giving her the book and having her read it. So the issue is, you could go through high school, get a diploma. You could go through college, get your BA. Go get your MA, get your PhD. If you don't like who you are, everything you do will be to the benefit of the oppressor. Real quick. See, it's very important that we teach our children at a young, very early age to love who they are. Because they'll learn how to drive a boat. They'll learn how to fly a plane. But if you don't love who they are, they'll be flying a plane for the Marines and dropping bombs in Africa. Seriously. It's more important that they love who they are than anything. If not, everything that they do will be for naught. Because if I don't like who I am, why am I going to use what I got to help something that I don't like?
Right.
I'm going to try to distance myself from it as much as possible. But you know what? Once you know what is, you automatically know what is not. If black is wrong, then what is right? Right. Exactly opposite. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I wanted to add that before the Brown versus Board of Education, we know that Kenneth and his wife Mamie, I believe Clark, came up with this study, but they actually for the study at the behest of Thurgood Marshall. Okay, so I get my information from attorney at War Alton Mattis, who studied the legal side of this thing. And so actually the very first study that Kenneth and Mamie did actually found that black children actually had better self-esteem and liked who they were simply because they were in segregation. The only teachers they saw were black. The only students that was in the classroom were black. And they didn't have those self-concepts that white was better. But they came up with the study because in Boston, there was some form of integration already where they would see, you know, white children and so forth. And that's where they got that information. But when they did it in Arkansas and in places in the South, the study was the reverse. But that information was never allowed to come out.
Right. Well, yeah, sometimes it's almost like when you go to court, you know, the prosecutor can let you know what type of information they're going to use against you, you know, but they don't ever tell you the information that they're not going to use. I think that was one of those situations where we're going to keep this in the back cover, you know. But yes, once again, and then of course we also know that, you know, they was winning small cases throughout the South that led up to the big case with Brown versus Topeka, Kansas, Board of Education. And so, of course, here's my bibliography, just to let everyone know where I got my information. Show you that we did some extensive research. Invincible Band, Anthropology of Slavery, Claude Mailer, Lumumba Behind the Gold. I alluded to that book. The New Jim Crow, African and Black Psychology in American Context, Philosophies of Opinions of Marcus Garvey, Black Jacobins, etc. Capitalism and Slavery, Eric Williams. You know, this is a black scholar. He actually argues or espouses that it was capitalism, first and foremost, that was the main basis. Then racism and, of course, Christianity, etc., came, but the main goal was to make money. Hard Road to Freedom, the story of African America, alludes to a lot of what I talked about Louis E. Horton. He's a world-renowned historian, and he talks a lot about the issues with, of course, you know, with the African women and the slave master and the type of stereotypes that came out of that. So just want to say thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, we could get right into it. Any questions, comments, concerns? propaganda. Thank you.
All right. Beautiful, beautiful.
You gotta have knowledge for life. You gotta have